GoForThe2.com in with the Week 6 predictions. Going to be a very SEC-heavy prediction video. 3 of the 7 picks will be within the conference. Let's jump right into it. Classic SEC West battle in Starkville Saturday night. Auburn and Mississippi State. Auburn's won 3 of the last 5 over the Bulldogs and have won those 3 games by 22.3 points per game. They picked up this win last year on the Plains, 49-10 over Mississippi State. When you look at Auburn last week, coming off a 24-13 win over Southern Mississippi, jumped out to a 14-3 lead before that game was delayed for 2.5 hours, and Auburn did hold on for the 11-point win. When you look at Mississippi State, coming off 2 disappointing conference losses 2 weeks ago on the road in Lexington, they dropped that ball game to Kentucky 28-7. Followed that up with a disappointing home loss last week to their former head coach, Dan Mullen, who led Florida to the 13-6 gutty win on the road in Starkville. When you look at Auburn overall, offensively only averaging 198 passing yards per game, and more importantly, only 178 rushing yards against opposing defenses. This is an offense in Auburn that is only converting 34% of their third down opportunities, and I think that's the matchup that you want to see play out Saturday night. When you look at Auburn under Gus Malzahn since 2014, Auburn is 12-13 on the road or on a neutral field site. That's only a 480 winning percentage. They did get a Week 1 win over Washington in Atlanta, but now have to go on the road to a very tough environment in Starkville. It's a conference game. Expect an electric atmosphere, and I think that could factor into this ball game Saturday night. When you look at the flip side, for Mississippi State, this is a balanced offense. They're rushing for 219 on the ground, passing for 216 through the air. And when you look at their front 7, holding opposing offenses to only 120 rushing yards per game. The secondary's holding opposing quarterbacks to only 166 passing yards per game. And I think they could force Jarrett Stidham into long third down opportunities in this matchup, especially playing at home. When you look at Joe Moorhead, the one thing that he's done, he allows his playmakers one-on-one opportunities in space. As bad as Mississippi State's been offensively over the last couple of weeks, this is an offense that's still converting 47% of their third down opportunities, and more importantly, holding opposing offenses to only 29% of their third down conversions. To me, I think that's the difference. I think Mississippi State does get the home win. I think it's high scoring, 38-31. Mississippi State strikes the upset over 8th-ranked Auburn Saturday night in Starkville. Expect an electric atmosphere as the Bulldogs do get the 7-point home win over Auburn. Let's stay within the SEC East. It's a classic battle between South Carolina and Missouri. South Carolina has won 3 of the last 5 over Missouri by 10.3 points per game and did get this win on the road last year in Columbia by a score of 31-13. Now, Missouri's coming off a week off of preparation. They 2 weeks ago did lose to Georgia by 14 points, now have a week of preparation, but I think that could be a detriment for this offense, especially this early in the season. Bye weeks could be either beneficial or detrimental to teams depending upon where they fall in the season. Usually in the early part of the year, a bye week could be detrimental because it could affect offensive line cohesiveness and, more importantly, quarterback to wide receiver relationship. And that's what Missouri offense is. They have a timing type of offense, want to get the football out in 3 to 5 seconds, short passes, slants, hitches, and then strike vertically when the opportunity is there. That could disrupt the timing with a week off of preparation. When you look at this ball game as well, South Carolina, the strength of South Carolina's defense is in the secondary. They're only giving up 159 passing yards per game, and more importantly, only 23% on third down conversions. When you look at the flip side for Missouri, the weakness of their defense is in their secondary. They're allowing 293 passing yards per game, and South Carolina is still averaging 257 through the air with their quarterback, Jake Bentley. I think that's the matchup as well. South Carolina is averaging 180 rushing yards per game. They're getting more offensive balance with those running backs led by Rico Dowdle, and I think to me that's the difference. Playing at home, I think South Carolina does get a convincing win over Missouri in this ball game. I think it's about 17 points, but I think it's high scoring. 45-28. South Carolina gets a convincing home win over the Tigers this coming weekend. Let's stay within the SEC. Alabama, Arkansas. Alabama's dominated Arkansas in recent years. They've won 5 straight over the Razorbacks by 23.4 points per game. They're coming off a 56-14 dominating home win last week. They jumped up 49-0, put in second and third teamers, and held on for the 56-14 win. Now go on the road to Fayetteville as big favorites in this ballgame. I look at Arkansas. I was on them last week. I thought they would play Texas A&M very tough, and they did. They fell behind 14-0 in that rivalry game and were in a position to possibly tie that ball game up later in the fourth quarter. Could not do it and lost that matchup by 7 points. This is a defense that's still only allowing 105 rushing yards per game, and more importantly, holding opposing offenses to only 26% on third down conversions. When you look at Alabama, they're going to force the tempo and force the pressure on Arkansas to match them score for score. Alabama's the best team in the country heading into week number 6, but I think Arkansas can get Alabama into a lower scoring game, much the way they did against Texas A&M. I think there's no doubt Alabama wins this ball game, but I think Arkansas keeps this game a lot closer than people think. In the end, Alabama does win. They get a 44-20 road win over the Razorbacks this coming Saturday. Look for Arkansas to run the football, keep Tua on the sidelines. Alabama picks up a 24-point road win over the Razorbacks and move to 6-0 on the season. Another intriguing battles within the Big Ten, Michigan State and Northwestern. You look at this ball game over the last couple of years, Northwestern's won 2 straight over Michigan State and have won those games by 11 points per game. Picked up this win last year in Ryan Field in double overtime, 39-31. But this is a team in Northwestern that jumped up 17-3 over Michigan. Couldn't hold the lead. They lost that matchup 20-17. Here's the matchup that you want to see play out in this ballgame and why I think Michigan State dominates this matchup. Michigan State has Penn State on deck in 2 weeks. I do not think they're looking ahead. Michigan State's coming off a very lackluster performance over in-state rival Central Michigan. Played down to the competition last week, but this is a Michigan State defense that's still rock solid. They're only allowing 40 rushing yards per game, and more importantly, holding opposing offenses to 35% on third down conversions. On the flip side, when you look at Northwestern, a one-dimensional offense that's averaging 275 passing yards per game and only 95 rushing yards against opposing defensive fronts. Over the last 3 weeks now, the rushing attack is getting considerably less production. 3 weeks ago against Duke, Northwestern only rushed for 99 yards in that 21-7 loss. In the home loss to Akron, that Northwestern offense only pounded the rock for 86 yards on the ground. Last week against Michigan, Northwestern only rushed for 23 yards in that matchup. That's forcing long third down situations for Clayton Thorson. Over the last couple of weeks, Northwestern's only converted 11 of 30 attempts. That's right in the area of 35%. This is still a Michigan State offense that's averaging 168 rushing yards per game, still passing for around 251 through the air with Brian Lewerke. To me, that's the difference. I do feel that Michigan State picks up a dominating 37-20 win over Northwestern in this ballgame. Northwestern has lost 3 straight games. I do not like the way they're playing. I think they met their match this coming weekend in East Lansing, a very difficult environment as well, going on the road in this ballgame. Another intriguing battle within the ACC, Miami, Florida State. Florida State's won 4 of the last 5 by 9 points per game. They're coming off a come-from-behind win over Louisville, 28-24. They fell behind 21-7 in that matchup, rallied by a late turnover. Louisville passed the football when they were up with about 2 minutes left on the 30-yard line. Florida State did get the interception, and then pass for a 58-yard touchdown over the top of Louisville to get that win 28-24. When you look at the flip side, Miami dominated North Carolina last week 47-10 in that ball game. They forced turnovers, were able to score off their turnovers, and will look to dominate the Seminoles in this matchup. You're talking about a Miami team that did get the 24-20 road win, come from behind fashion last year in Tallahassee. But let's look at the body of work for both teams. You're talking about Miami that dominated FIU, Toledo, and North Carolina. When you look at the flip side, Florida State's played the better competition. They lost to Virginia Tech. They lost to Syracuse. They stepped up against Northern Illinois, which is still a solid MAC team. And then they did knock off Louisville on the road and come from behind fashion. I'm not sold on Florida State being an elite team, but I do feel they have a solid defense and a better defense than people think. This is a defense in Florida State that's only given up 101 rushing yards per game. They do have 14 total sacks as a defensive unit, and more importantly, holding opposing offenses to only around 34% on third down conversions. I think that's the difference. When you look at DeAndre Francois in Florida State, they're still averaging 275 passing yards per game. They're challenging defenses over the top. They need to get the running game going, only averaging around 97 rushing yards per game, but I think they could do it against a smaller defensive front in Miami. Granted, Miami's played well. They force turnovers, but they struggle, especially against the better teams on their schedule. I know Florida State's not elite, but I still think they have enough to keep this game very close, and I do feel that they pull out the 28-21 win over Miami in this ball game. Not going to be easy. It's a rivalry game. You're going to get Florida State's best effort this coming Saturday. Throw the records out the window. A classic rivalry that Florida State will look to rebound in a big way. Seminoles do strike the 7-point upset over the Hurricanes this coming Saturday. Another intriguing battle, Pac-12 matchup between Utah and Stanford. Stanford coming off a disappointing road loss to Notre Dame. I picked Notre Dame last week. They stepped up. Very balanced offense, passing for over 200, rushing for over 200 as well, and more importantly, holding Stanford's offense in check with only 55 rushing yards in that matchup. When you look at Utah, coming off a disappointing 28-24 road loss to Washington State. But here's the matchup. You look at this ball game overall, Stanford picked up this win last year in Salt Lake City, 23-20 in that ball game. They were pushed to the limit by that Utah offense. But here's the matchup that I think you'll see play out on Saturday in Palo Alto. Utah only giving up 18 points per game. They're giving up 181 passing yards per game. And more importantly, only 81 rushing yards to opposing offenses. I know they allowed 416 passing yards to Washington State, but that's the recipe to beat Utah. They struggle with formations that spread you with 5 wide type of formations and stretch you vertically. That's still not the offensive scheme for Stanford. Stanford still wants to run the football. They want to work off of play action with KJ Costello. And unless they can do that successfully on each and every down, they're not going to win this ball game. Here's the matchup as well. When you look at Stanford, struggled in third down conversions. As an offense, they're only averaging around 34% of their third down opportunities. When you look at the flip side in Utah, holding opposing offenses to 25% on third downs, I think that's the matchup, along with the mobility of Tyler Huntley, the Utah quarterback. You saw Ian Book make some plays outside the pocket. He did have 47 rushing yards in that battle last weekend in South Bend. Look for Tyler Huntley to put some pressure on that Stanford defense on the perimeter. And I think Stanford is just a product of their schedule now. They played some very difficult opponents. San Diego State, a blue-collar team, week number 1, they followed that up with USC, who still gets top 10 talent. It was a Pac-12 game. They won that ball game 17-3. They faced UC Davis before going on the road to Oregon, won that ball game, an emotional factor, then went back on the road to face Notre Dame, now have to come back home to face a blue-collar club in Utah. I'm just not sold on Stanford being a fresh team at this point in the season. I think Utah does strike the upset. 28-24. Utah gets the win over the Cardinal this coming Saturday. Intriguing battle within the conference of the Big 12. It's Baylor and Kansas State. Kansas State fell behind, 14-0 to Texas, and lost that matchup 19-14. They were in a position to possibly take the lead, could not do it. They now go on the road to face a Baylor team that put up 33 points in the 66-33 loss to Oklahoma last week. This is a Baylor offense that's averaging 337 passing yards per game. Their quarterback, Charlie Brewer, has completed 62% of his passes, 1,162 yards. He's playing very well within the offensive scheme. You look at the MO for Kansas State. Defensively, they're allowing 230 passing yards to opposing offenses. When you look at Kansas State last year, they allowed 4 teams within the conference to pass for over 400 and struggle when teams stretch Kansas State vertically. When you look at Kansas State offensively, not the same offense over the last couple of years under Bill Snyder. This is an offense last week that only averaged 107 rushing yards against Texas. On the year, Kansas State only averaging 146 yards on the ground. Over the last couple of years, Kansas State in 2017 averaged 198 yards on the ground. In 2016, they averaged 231 on the ground. If Kansas State cannot run the football consistently, they can't dictate the tempo and then force 3 and outs and give the football back to opposing offenses. And that's the recipe on how teams are beating Kansas State. More importantly, you look at Kansas State from an offensive line perspective. 5 games, 17 sacks allowed. And when you look at their defense, Kansas State is allowing opposing offenses to convert 49% of their third down opportunities, going up against an efficient offense in Charlie Brewer and Baylor. This is an offense in Baylor that's converting right in the area of about 43% of their third down attempts, playing at home. I think this is a bad matchup for Kansas State. I think Baylor, who lost this matchup 33-20 last year, I think they get the 17-point win, 37-20. Baylor's only allowing 166 rushing yards per game. They're playing more disciplined football under Matt Rule. And when you look at Kansas State, I think they're starting to wear down as well. Baylor does get a 17-point home win over Kansas State this coming weekend. Stay with me all season long at goforthe2.com. That's goforthe2.com. If you want to know about some of the other top 25 games, you could follow the radio show 10 to 1 p.m. or on TV, Optimum or Cablevision, New York, New Jersey, or Connecticut, channel 238. That's 238 Fantasy FNTSY Sports Radio and Television Network. Or you can catch the show Saturday morning, 10 to 1 p.m. on YouTube. Go to FNTSY College Football Today. Stay with me all season long. Have a great weekend, everyone.